Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar sponsored by HNB General Insurance. My name is Gihan Kumar, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Federation of IT Industry in Sri Lanka. So it has been a very, how would I say, a very volatile time in the world, and a lot of issues happening. And we thought it was very pertinent for us to organize this webinar to find out what the cyber pandemic holds for the IT industry in Sri Lanka. So we have a fantastic panel of speakers this afternoon, and I am pleased to introduce our speakers. I will just give a brief introduction to each of our speakers. We have Mr. Caspersz. So Joey is currently the Managing Director of Steuart Insurance Brokers. He was the Director of Finlay's Colombo Limited, having joined the company insurance arm of the company in 1997. As the main board director, he was in charge of insurance, environmental services, property and wholesale courier business. Joey actually started his insurance career way back in 1980 and has extensive executive experience in the insurance industry in Sri Lanka and overseas. He's an old boy of St. Peter's College, Colombo, where he was a prefect and a house captain. He has been a Rotarian and a competent Toastmaster and is currently an office bearer of the Dutch Burger Union of Ceylon. So welcome, Joey. Good afternoon. Glad to have you here. Then we have Miss Deepali Rao. Hi, Deepali. Good afternoon. Right, so let me give a brief introduction to Deepali. Deepali has been associated with India Insure for the past 16 years in various capacities. She was instrumental in setting up the Pune branch, building the specialty lines vertical, and starting the reinsurance broking vertical of the company. She is currently responsible for the growth and expansion of the specialty lines and the reinsurance broking vertical for India Insure. Prior to India Insure, Deepali has 4 years of marketing experience in companies such as NIIT, Z Education, and Ad Expression. So we like to welcome Deepali this afternoon for this webinar. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Gihan Diaz. Professor Gihan Diaz graduated from the University of Moderator in 1985 and was awarded a doctorate in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of California in 1992. In addition to being a professor in computer science and engineering and director National Languages Processing Center at the University of Moderator, Sri Lanka, he serves as the domain registrar of the LK Domain Registry and as an advisor to Xcert. Professor Gihan has been active in several areas of computing, including computer networking, language technologies, e-learning, security, internet identity, and personal cloud. He's currently developing resources, technologies, and tools to allow us to use IT in Sinhala and Tamil. He also currently serves the Federation of IT Industry, FITIS, as the Senior Vice Chairman. So welcome, Professor Gihan. Next, we have a very important personality who's actually going to run this show. Sujit functions as the Chief Information Security Officer for several organizations and advises various organizations on cybersecurity related matters. Sujit currently serves as the Vice President of the Professional Consultants Chapter of FITIS, while he's also the President of the ISC Squared Colombo Chapter. So Sujit is actually going to be your moderator for this afternoon. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the proceedings to Sujit. Sujit, over to you.
Thank you, Jihan. Thank you for that wonderful, warm introduction. And I'm excited to be here. And I've got seasoned, experienced professionals here, insurance, IT, and of course, they know the domain very well, and very especially the Sri Lankan market per se, both in terms of the business and as well as the insurance aspect. Right. So I would like to, start the conversation by, bringing out some statistics. Recently published Internet Crime Report by FBI, they have highlighted 6 security cyber crimes. Right? The first one, they're actually listing it as business email compromise, which amounts to about $2.3 billion US for the year 2021. The second one, which they are talking about, is investment scams, right? So where people entice people to invest in like pyramid schemes and things like that, which amounts to about 1.45 million US dollars. The third one, it's a very interesting one, right? Confidence scam. Another word for confidence scam is romance scam. That's almost about 956 million US dollars, right? How people get deceived. The list goes on. Now, if you really look at these top three, only the first one, which directly impacts the business, right? Business email compromise. Let's look at the fourth one. The fourth one talks about personal data breach, which talks about 517 million. And then it goes on to real estate, which is about 350 million. And then tech support scams, it's about 347 million. So the list goes on. But it gives us a context in terms of what this landscape looks like. So Professor Diaz, I'd like to start this thing with you. Now, when we look at Sri Lanka, right, I mean, you've been in the industry for over 30 years, and being the domain registrar, you have a lot of insight in terms of what the businesses are functioning in Sri Lanka and the kind of problems which they face, right? So could you just give us a background in terms of, what the landscape itself in Sri Lanka is for IT and non-IT?
Thank you, Sujit. I think Sri Lanka has quite a vibrant IT market, but at the same time, we do have a long way to go. So especially regarding software companies who are exporting to other countries, as well as IT services companies, I think we have a very good and strong industry. And also, of course, compared with other countries, we have a reasonably amount of computerization or digitization, or whatever you want to call it, in our companies. But I think there's a lot more which needs to be done. And Sri Lanka, of course, just like any other country, has had its own share of cyber incidents. But I think we are fairly fortunate that there has been nothing which really caused the entire, like a bankruptcy of a major company or something like that. But it's going to be, only a matter of time. As sooner or later, we are going to have something which is a very big. So yes, we are somewhere, we need to go further, but at the same time, we need to be very careful that we don't get into a situation where we have huge financial and societal impacts due to IT, I would say, cyber security or even non-security incidents.
Professor, I think what I picked up very interesting here is you said that we've not had major incidents, right?
I would say that we have been somewhat fortunate that we haven't had like a bankruptcy of a major company or something like that.
Correct, right? So there have been stray incidents here and there. Some get highlighted due to various reasons, maybe an activist targeting a website, especially in the months to come. Usually we see it April, May. There are propagandas which they do, and then they target a few websites. Apart from that, I guess some companies do have issues with relating to ransomware or business email compromise. But we have not seen something like a colonial pipeline kind of incidents or a tech company being compromised. So with that background, Joey, I'm just going to ask you this, right? When we define this word cyber crime or cyber risk, it becomes very complex. What we are saying is every single device which is connected to the network becomes part and parcel of the global internet. And which means there could be a situation where we are able to see the device. There could be a certain times we may not be able to understand what those devices are, right? So when I'm talking about two companies collaborating, one company has visibility into what devices they have, but whereas the partner company may or may not adhere to the best practices. But the question I want to ask you, right? I mean, when Professor Diaz says, okay, we've been very lucky, I would say, that we've not had cyber incidents in the past. Does that mean that we don't have to have cyber insurance? This is a very open question. It can be for tech companies, it can be for others. Is cyber insurance relevant at all?
I think that's a fair question. As Professor Diaz has indicated, we haven't had a incident to the extent where a company has had to shut down or been declared bankrupt. However, if you look at some of the statistics that are available now, the 24th edition of the Microsoft Security Intelligence Report indicates that cryptocurrency mining malware is 283% higher in Sri Lanka than elsewhere in the world. 229% higher than the Asia Pacific average. Ransomware encounters in Sri Lanka are up 100% higher than the global average. Malware encounters are 109% higher than the global average, and so on. Okay, so obviously, and globally also, the incidence of cyber issues and risks and hacking are on the increase. Now, coupled with that is that here in Sri Lanka, businesses and individuals, including my little cuddy at the top of the road, are using IT far more than we have done in the past. And businesses are becoming more and more dependent on IT. Now, given the fact that these attacks and these issues are on the increase, and in Sri Lanka it appears to be, I'm sure Professor Diaz might be able to correct me, but this is stuff that was available on the internet. It does appear that in Sri Lanka we do have a problem in terms of the increase in incidence of cyber attacks in the island. So looking at a risk transfer mechanism of some kind, and insurance is something that businesses should look at. I'm not saying that it's the perfect solution, and in fact right now it is difficult for Sri Lankan businesses to arrange cyber insurance, as I'm sure Deepali will confirm. It may not be cost effective as well. It's very expensive at the moment. And also the underwriters require all kinds of safeguards before they're even willing to quote for terms. However, it is fully worth our while in terms of businesses to look at the mechanism, find out exactly what the coverage is, and then find out how much the cost of insurance would be. That is, in buying insurance, you're transferring certain aspects of the cyber risk to the insurance company. You need to examine the cost effectiveness of such a mechanism. In terms of relevance, I think right now it is certainly extremely relevant to businesses in Sri Lanka. Whether you can buy a viable product though in this current environment is open to question.
Joy, a couple of significant points you mentioned, right? One is affordability. So you kept speaking a lot in the context of affordability, and you also mentioned it is important because even the corner shop is now using technology, right? So while the IT footprint is expanding a lot, and it has expanded very rapidly. So going back to my earlier observation when I said every single device which gets connected to the internet becomes a risk, or it becomes part of a risk profile. So Deepali, I mean, sitting where you are, and when you look at your clientele in that part of the world where you sit and you converse, we probably are a very small economy comparatively, right? So I'm just going to relate a couple of things. One, we are looking at the businesses have to function. Only when the businesses function, the economy can grow and the GDP can also grow. So there's a direct relationship, right? Now, does that mean being small, not seeing significant amount of cyber threats does not warrant us to have cyber insurance? What would you advise the boards and the key stakeholders? What should they be doing in order to get there? Deepali?
Thanks, Sujit. Thanks for the question, and it's been a pleasure to be here. Don't think I'll agree with the statement saying that we're too small to be considered, and that clearly is, not correct at all. I would say probably Sri Lanka right now is at that stage where India was maybe 2 years, 3 years ago, where in India, it's like this, till I have a huge bill from the hospital, I don't realize that I need to have a medical insurance in place. It's only when the bill hits me, I said, damn it, for the next time, let me have something in place. So it's just drawing a parallel from that. India also has gone through that phase where we have said, and even now, in fact, there are a huge number of corporates, in spite of all the events that are happening, in spite of the attacks that are happening, who feel that, nothing is going to happen to me. I possibly have the best IT system in place, or it's just out of my budget. And that's probably also the state that Sri Lanka is in currently now. The corporates in Sri Lanka possibly still have a thought process which says that, yes, it is a risk. Yes, it is critical. And yes, things are happening. But hey, nothing much has happened in Sri Lanka, right? I mean, nothing has really hit my door. So till such time, do I really need to be spending money on that? And end of the day, for any board or any CEO, it becomes a cost benefit analysis. What is critical right now, I think, is to look at it from an angle saying that, cyber threat is no longer a situation where if it happens, I have to see what is going to be done. It is a question of when it happens, what do I do? And that is a level of preparedness, I think, corporates across the globe and irrespective of the size of the country should be looking at it. More so, I would say the smaller the size, the higher the risk. Because hackers are not novice. They are fairly skilled professionals, if I can say so. And they are typically on the lookout for organizations or regions where the level of preparedness is limited and where it, kind of opens up the door easily, where people are not educated about IT security enough to say that don't click on unnecessary emails, and you could just be one of the 2,000 emails that have been sent out, which could cause the the challenge from a cyber risk exposure perspective. So yeah, I would say it is imperative for Sri Lanka now to certainly look at enhancing the prepared level to make sure that you're able to deal with this risk. I hear what Joey says. It is difficult to get a cover. Currently, the reinsurance markets are not friendly right now, but it doesn't help to be prepared and to deal with that so that, God forbid, when there is a situation that happens, you have something in place, to fall back upon.
Right. Deepali, I'm going to stay with you, right? You
Okay.
mentioned a few things, right? And then I'm going to take the conversation back to Professor Diaz and then to Joey, right? In that order, I'm going to do things like this. So you said preparedness, right?
Yeah.
Sooner or later, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Size does not matter, right? And that's a catchy keyword I thought I should highlight, right? Being small, the risk is high. So these are a few things which I heard from you. Now, I want you to tell in very simple ways to the people who are in this forum right now, who are listening to us, or people who are going to be listening to this recording at a later point in time, what does it take to prepare themselves? Like step 1, 2, 3, if you can. I don't know whether that is in your gambit of things. Otherwise, we can call on Joey to help us. But I'd like you to start, and then we will take the conversation to Professor Diaz.
Sujit, I wish there was a ready-made prescription to say that you do these 10 things and you are well prepared to deal with the cyber risk, at least. the journey between this is good enough to I need to enhance it further, it's a very short duration for that journey, right? Because the more the technology evolves, the more the risk exposure increases. Having said that, I would say there would be a certain level of hygiene that would necessarily be required for every organization to have. So just to give you an example, we were working with a company here who's essentially a tour operator in India, and they have a system of about 25, 30 odd systems. They have a network. They really didn't think they needed to have IT set up in place, and they had some very, very basic steps. But what they did not have was a secure login. What they did not have was a secure access to the internet. It was pretty much left open, saying that we are a small firm, nothing's going to happen. They bought a cyber insurance policy for about, I think, $500,000. Within 4 months, they had a ransomware attack, and pretty much 3/4 of the limit got eaten away in just getting the forensic done, enhancing or getting everything back into place as it was earlier. So it's really that. So I would say, in terms of what should be there from a preparedness level, things like, secure access, I would say a lot of IT jargon that would come up, and all my colleagues and friends out here would be better equipped to use the jargon. So I'll say it in simple language. We are essentially talking about a lot of training to the employees in terms of educating them in how to deal with technology, how to deal with the cyber risk. Two, we are talking about regular updates on your entire IT infrastructure, making sure you have your security systems in place, which are up to date. And again, up to date is something which will keep happening time and again. So you need to ensure that you are doing your patch updates very regularly. You are updating all these softwares and the various versions regularly. If there are multiple access to your systems and to your network, then do you have the authentication levels that are required? Does anybody and everybody have access to your system? And more importantly, if there is an incident that is likely to happen, then what is your response plan? How are you going to deal with that? How long is it going to take for you to come back into a mode of being able to work again? So I would, from a reinsurance perspective, any reinsurer who would be looking at offering cover, or any insurer, would essentially look at these critical aspects in terms of how forthcoming and how proactive organizations are in making sure that the IT systems are up to date, and to making sure that there is a huge level of alertness among the employees and the board of directors as well, to make sure that we are prepared and not take any risk. I'm not too sure if I've answered your question, Sujit, but yeah.
You have, and I'm not sure whether the screen has moved. I've lost your view. Anyways, you're able to hear me, right?
I can, yes.
Yeah. So, Deepali, yes, you did answer, right? So I'm just going to cut across to Professor Diaz. Professor Diaz, I mean, if you look at our industry, right? I mean, we do have a significant number of companies in the software development space. And there's also a lot of emphasis in startup and startup related activities in Sri Lanka. Now, we heard what Joey and we heard from Deepali as well, right? In terms of being prepared. Professor Diaz, my question to you is, how well are our companies prepared, or what is your input to them as to what they should be doing in terms of the next steps to get ahead of the curve?
Right. So let me look at it in two ways. As you said, we have the actual companies which are doing information systems or e-commerce systems or whatever, So maybe an insurance company or a supermarket or whatever, or even let's say organization like FITIS, which have a lot of members and we deal with the members and so on, and conduct events like this webinar. Now, we are, of course, exposed to various cyber risks. But let me also look at it from the point of view of FITIS members. And our FITIS members are people who provide services to various companies who then, using that, they will provide various IT-based services. Now, as you said, Christy, Sujit, we have software companies, but that's not all. Right? We also have the digital service companies who provide, like, for example, cloud-based platforms. Then we have the hardware and the communication providers, and those also are very important. So, for example, if you take a large company and they are doing a lot of remote customers, I mean, today, I mean, last 2 years, maybe today is slightly different, but everybody was at home and using their e-banking and e-shopping and everything else. And let's say your communications provider goes down, and what's going to happen, right? You're going to have a huge business loss. Is it due to some hacking? Is it due to some equipment failure? Is it due to some software? You know, all of those are there. So what we need to look at is that all organizations, not only the end users, the end organizations, all the suppliers behind them also need to look at, okay, if my thing goes wrong, not only one company, it's certainly if one of our major service providers, telecom providers goes down, we might find that a large number of our organizations they just can't work, right? Maybe not even just electronic transactions, but even their normal branch transactions will just fall down. Now, we need to look at the liability for that. What's going to happen if that happens? So I think this is what we are looking at. Everybody who does anything regarding cyber should look at what will happen if something bad happens to me, and what if all my customers sue me or ask me for compensation for my service not being there, which will allow them or which cause them to lose this huge amount of money.
So, Professor Diaz, I mean, I just want to extend this question, right? So,
right.
So you did mention in terms of disruption, in terms of loss of data and things like that. Now, do you feel that, you know, as FITIS or any other organization, that we could probably give them some guidance in terms of what they should be doing, or they should be doing it themselves? Is there something which we can look at?
No, certainly, I think as FITIS, which is the Federation of IT Sri Lanka, we should guide not only our members, but our members' customers and the companies in general, as well as the general public and many other people, about the risks and how to mitigate them. Right? And it's tremendous, right? And the average person does not really know what to do. I will give you an example which happened this morning. Mm-hmm. One of my staff came and said, oh, somebody, my password is expiring. I said, okay, why? Well, I just got an email saying my password is expiring, and if you want it to be renewed, please click here. So I quickly said, just show me that email, and it was obviously some kind of scam. But my staff member was not really aware of that, and luckily he asked me, but otherwise he would have probably clicked on that and got some kind of malware installed on his machine. Now multiply that by whatever number of organizations, whatever number of employees, right? So it's a huge problem, and we need to create a huge amount of awareness on that.
Sure. So Professor Diaz, I mean, that's a very good example. Ignorance sometimes, or it's just that they've not had the opportunity to understand what's the best practice they should be following. And I'm just going back to Deepali on the same thing, because she also did mention about hygiene practice, or she was also speaking about the awareness. So I guess that is important in terms of, you know, ensuring that your infrastructure is secure, and also becomes the ingredient or the first step for people to start looking at the cyber insurance. So Joey, I'm just coming back to you and want to ask you this. I'm sure you've had several conversations with the boards in different companies, maybe the senior managers of companies who are entrusted with the custodianship of infrastructure or maybe even the data. Are companies doing enough?
Yeah, so there is a problem here with regard to the approach of IT to the possibility of an insurance solution to some of the risks that they manage. So generally speaking, and I say this with due respect to all IT personnel who might be attending this seminar, generally speaking, the IT personnel feel that their security systems that they have in place, their processes and so on, are robust enough in order to withstand some of the worst effects of a cyber attack. They are less likely to admit that an issue could occur. Now, what we would like to tell those of you in IT who may come across incidences where boards ask you to look at the possibility of insurance, and here I'd like to add on to something that Deepali mentioned as well, is to go through the process of completing the forms that the insurance service provider will give you in terms of obtaining a quotation, whether it be an insurance company like HNB Assurance that you might be dealing with direct, or the broker such as ourselves or Deepali, whom you might be dealing with. Okay, they will make available to you very, very detailed forms in terms of trying to analyze the risk. Now, quite a lot of the information on these forms might be routine stuff that you're already doing as a matter of route and so on, but it gives you a checklist, okay, of what is best in class overseas in terms of analyzing your exposure to cyber risks, and going through that process of checking whether you're compliant with some of these questions that have been posed to you. And mind you, these forms are very detailed. Without exaggeration, they're about 8 to 10 pages long, as Deepali will confirm. Plus, there's now additional forms that they have brought into play to do with ransomware and so on, even more detailed. So sometimes it's time consuming for IT people and personnel to actually sit down and go through this. But in my opinion, it is worth your while to go through that exercise. Okay, firstly, to use it as a benchmark as to what is best in class overseas, and certainly from the reinsurance point of view in trying to analyze what your risks are. And then asking your insurance service provider to provide you with terms. At that point, you can then analyze as to whether it is viable for you to look at an insurance product, or spend either part or all of that money in beefing up your systems in order to withstand a cyber attack. Just before I end on this particular topic, a couple of points that I want to make. And first is that some of the things that the reinsurance companies will be looking at, and I'm sure Deepali again will confirm this, is that they are looking to ensure that you're improving your access control across all your systems. That's number one. Then number two is that you are spending sufficient time and energy in upgrading your system and software management programs across your groups. And finally, and something here that we lack in Sri Lanka, is a risk reporting, an exchange of information in terms of cyber risk, both locally and also internationally.
Thank you, Joe.
That's your question, Sujit.
Yes, you did. And that means more questions to Professor Diaz now. Picking up on those last 3 points which Joey mentioned, right? He spoke about risk reporting. The other one is in terms of significantly what I see is continuously upgrade technology systems and be current. And the third one, I would probably bring in Deepali's observation in terms of hygiene, education, awareness. Professor Diaz, my question to you directly, do companies see this as an overhead or adding to their operating costs?
Right. I think if you want me to answer to that, the answer is obviously yes. right? And this is true for any kind of insurance or any kind of, not only insurance, any kind of prevention or trying to avoid risk. So obviously, if you do anything and nothing happens, the board and everybody else will say, well, you spent so many millions and nothing whatsoever happened, so that money is down the drain. So obviously that question is always there, but I would like to look at it from a slightly different point of view, and again looking at the point of view of the secondary providers, the infrastructure providers, who often don't even know that there is a risk. They just do something and they do not see, okay, what could happen if my customer loses money? And so I think we need to create some awareness, at least that there is a risk. Now, if I, as say the IT manager or the chief financial officer or whoever, looks at a risk and decide, okay, I'm not going to do anything about it, or I'm going to do a very small amount of risk mitigation and the rest of it I'm going to bear. I mean, that's fine, right? I mean, they've looked at it and decided. But I think the biggest problem would be just not being aware and be blindsided and suddenly have some huge claim coming up. So I think this is true for IT companies, so for the operation companies, but it's, I think, extremely true for IT companies. No IT company that I know of has really looked at the risk of something going wrong and then they being liable. So I think this is something we need to really look at, and we need to create, as we discussed earlier, much more awareness into this.
Right. So
if I can add, Sujit, to what Professor just mentioned as well, but also bear in mind that the legal framework under which we are operating has also changed. So we've got this Personal Data Protection Act, which has now come into being and which has been enacted, which places a lot of responsibility on all of us in terms of the data that we collect on behalf of third parties. In addition to the Act, various other laws as well, which govern the management of IT systems. So the landscape has changed as well, the legal landscape.
absolutely. So Joey, legal landscape has changed. I'm going to come back and talk a little more on that a little later. Dwelling on the observations Dr. Professor Diaz mentioned, this again, I'm going to ask you this question. I mean, you have the right to pass this question. We all know that, the government is very keen on increasing the Forex revenue into the country, right? So we set a target of $5 billion to achieve using export of IT software, IT services, and various things. Now, would not having an insurance policy become a hindrance in achieving that objective? Because globally, companies have started asking for this risk cover because they are now worried that the supplier and the supplier's supplier, which is the third party, they want to ensure that the ecosystem is covered. I'd like, if you can respond to this, if you can't, okay, I understand, but
Sujit, your ask question to me.
Professor Diaz.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right. Yes. So I'm not very sure. Okay, could you repeat the question again?
So the question, Professor Diaz, is the government's desire is to increase the
software exports. Right.
Exports.
Okay. Yeah. So I think there is two ways of looking at it. One is as ticking a checkbox, right? My RFP says I should have insurance. Okay, I get insurance. So that's one way of looking at it. The other one is to see, okay, whether the RFP says I need it or not, do I need it? So I think that is what we need to look at, right? Not simply to say, yes, there's a checkbox, and if I don't check that, tick that checkbox, I will not be eligible for this particular contract. Therefore, I, contact some company and get, the minimum amount of insurance needed to be able to tick tick that checkbox, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's, like, tracking this COVID insurance cover to go to a country simply because they require it, as opposed to actually taking insurance to meet your cost if you actually get COVID. And there's a huge difference. And practically it happened to one of my colleagues. He went to Dubai and he got COVID, and the insurance really didn't cover most of his costs. It was just whatever it was, right? So we need to look at it from not just doing it because there's a regulatory or a commercial requirement, but because it is helping you do your business better.
Good. I think you set the stage for the next round of questions to Joey and Deepali, right? Insurance. You said having an insurance. Somebody says you need to have an insurance, you tick mark, and maybe you go get an insurance policy. Now, maybe I'll start with Deepali. Can you tell us what is it? Is it something you have just something like a insurance policy, cyber insurance policy? You just go, you get it, and then you can say that you have it, or are there variety of
your question, Sujit, is I think there is a cycle that corporates, and just taking on with what Professor Diaz just mentioned, there is a cycle which I know the Indian market has gone through, and I'm pretty sure that the Sri Lankan market is also going through or will also go through, is you start off buying insurance as a tick in the box because your customer is insisting for it. That is typically what drives, the need for the insurance, because the customers in the US wanted the Indian IT companies to buy it, and then it's just the train which goes on. Having bought that and having put a tick in the box, the mindset is that I have bought it, I need something, $1 million cover, I've paid X amount of premium, and I have kept it in place. 3 years down the line, there are no losses. 4th year, there was an incident which happened, and suddenly somebody remembers, hey, we have a policy in place, and maybe that should cover it. And that is when the questions start arising, saying, okay, now what is covered under my policy? Why have I been paying premium for the last 4 years when nothing gets covered? So I think that cycle is something that every market will go through, and I think even the Sri Lankan market will go through, when corporates will start realizing they'll buy it as a tick in the box, and then eventually they will start looking at it from a risk management perspective. I'm pretty confident that the cycle will not take as long as it did in India. It will be a much faster cycle because of what the experiences around the world have been. Having said that, in terms of what kind of covers are available in the market, are there multiple options? It's a yes and no answer. Yes, because you have quite a few reinsurers who are there in the market who offer the product. A Chubb wording would possibly be very different from an AIG wording, which would possibly be very different from an Allianz wording, and so on. But in all fairness, the overall framework of the cover would still be, pretty much consistent. And the 3 or 4 critical things like the cyber liability aspect, the first party cost aspect, the regulatory penalties aspect, these are things or the business interruption aspect, so to say. So these are critical things that all reinsurers would offer in their product. Yes, there will be some tweaking that each one of them will do. There'll be insurers or reinsurers who will give you a slightly more wider wording. There will be reinsurers who will probably have an ambiguous language, so you really can't make out clearly what is covered and what is not. And I think that is where the role of somebody like Mr. Joey and myself comes into place, where we are able to talk to our clients and then explain to them which wording would be more convenient and suitable for them. So yes, there are options, but the overall framework still continues to be the same. And Sujit, when you have a requirement of a coverage, you can ask any of the reinsurers to customize it to what you need. So it really does not matter from whom you are buying it. End of the day, how you are able to negotiate with them and customize the product to your requirement is what really will help you in the long run.
Okay, fantastic. Right, I'm going to take something from you and probably ask Joey as well. Joey, do you want to add anything to what Deepali mentioned so that I can ask you the...
No, well, basically what, I mean, I agree totally with what Deepali has just mentioned. So the framework of the policy coverage, whether you go to, whichever insurance company, either locally or internationally, is more or less the same. So there's this third party liability aspect of it. Then what is called first party losses, that is the person who's taking out the insurance, losses that are financial losses that they need to cover. Then you have things like business interruption, and then finally crisis management. Now, those are the kind of the broad areas of the coverage that is provided and offered in the market. But as Deepali rightly pointed out, within that, there are kind of wordings that you can use and extensions to the interpretation of the coverage and so on, which can widen the coverage, Sujit. And there, the service provider, again, whether it be the insurance company like H&B Assurance or your broker, will be able to help you guide you through the extensions that are possible. Bear in mind that the cyber insurance is very expensive. It's not a cheap cover. And expanding the scope of will increase your cost as well. Again, though, all I'm saying is explore the possibility. Find out how much it would cost. You want a particular type of coverage, talk to your insurance service provider, tell them what it is that you need, and find out what that cost is, and then take a call as to whether that's something that you want to purchase and pass on to insurance, or whether you want to, as I said earlier, beef up your processes and your security, and then mitigate your losses that way.
So Joey, a couple of things you said. I'm just picking up from certain keywords, right? You said the wider the scope, the expensive it will get. But Deepali also spoke about customization. I would say, when the moment you say it's expensive, and I think half the people would have left the panel right now, right? But I want them to stay back, right? So let's talk about this customization. Right?
Actually, if I can interrupt your thought there for a minute, retain your audience. One of the advantages in going through the process is that your IT people who may be attending this discussion will be able to persuade the board of directors to give them more money to beef up their processes and security instead of buying insurance.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But I would also like to add
Having
to that.
said that, it's never an either or situation, Sujit. I think that's also critical for organizations to understand. It has to be and it can't be either and or.
Yeah, right. And I think it's, when you say and, it's really, if you spend more on doing your processes, your premium should really go down, right? Yes. And if you can convince your insurer and the reinsurers, whatever, that, yeah, your risk is much less. Now, that may or may not be possible, but theoretically that should happen.
Yes.
So
correct.
actually, whatever money you put into improving your cyber should actually reflect of a lower premium.
Absolutely. So what I'm gathering from all three of you saying is, use the questionnaire to assess the status check. Do a status check. Yeah. How good are you? How bad you are? See what you can improve. And as Professor Diaz rightly said, if you have improved your processes, the chances are your premium has to go down, right? So the chances of your weaknesses or vulnerability in your network should have gone, right? But I just still want to come back to the word customization, right? So Deepali, if you can, take a moment to say, what does it mean, customization? How can you customize something? Right. I mean, I know you can have custom design jewelry. Is it as easy as that?
Yes, certainly wish.
Yes. So if you can share some insights on that.
So customization in a cyber policy, we'll especially be talking about a couple of things. In terms of, most importantly, you have something called as the policy deductible, or the policy, the quantum of a claim which the client has to bear over and above which the insurance policy is going to respond or reimburse. So your customization typically starts from there. Now, I know all the corporate world who are listening into the conversation would say that ideally I want it to be at the lowest level so that nothing goes from my pocket and everything comes in from the insurance company. The minute you say that, your costs start going up because the insurance company is going to be paying you more claim, he's going to charge you more premium for that, right? So customization starts with taking an assessment of what is the extent of loss that your balance sheet can hold, and then structuring your policy in a manner that, okay, I am participating in the process of risk management or risk mitigation, and hence I'm going to have skin in the game. I will take an X amount of loss on my balance sheet, and only if something crosses this, then I go to the insurance company. So that's really the first, and I think the most basic level of customization, so to say, which comes in. The other one is in terms of your business interruption losses. How soon will your system come back to its original state of working? A standard policy would typically give you an 8 to 12 hours of a waiting period before the insurance can trigger. Now, whether that is less, that is more, that is sufficient, you need something more. Again, that depends on how robust your system is, how robust your response times are in case of incidences, which will then help you negotiate with the insurance company in terms of what should that time frame be. Again, the shorter the time, the more the premium, the more the time that you have. Sorry, in this case, it'll be reverse. The shorter the time for you to recover, your premium is going to drop because you're so confident of getting back to being, to your original state. The insurance company has more faith in you, but you ask for a longer gestation period, then the price is going to go up. Other than that, you have a lot of extensions which come. You have the liability section, you have the penalties section, the crisis response section, which typically come as sublimits under the policy. So if you're buying 100 million cover, then these are costs which get sublimited. So you then negotiate of, to the what is the extent to which you want these add-ons. And that would again depend on what industry you are from. You're a IT company, you're a financial institution, you are a retail company, and that will decide in terms of what could be your extent of exposure and what should be the limit that you would want to buy. So these are really the kind of customizations that are possible and that can be negotiated under the policies.
So Professor Diaz, I'm just going to rephrase the same question which I asked Deepali. If customization is an option, what kind of things do you think our industries, especially the ITES software industry, would actually be looking at? Is there anything which you think we could probably think of, or maybe as for starters, in your words, is that something which people should be looking at?
Right. So I'm not an expert on insurance and what insurance companies would be able to customize. But obviously, two main things is the maximum limit, right? How much is the maximum limit and how much is the deductible? And so these are two things people should look at. And also, as we discussed earlier, what can we do to reduce the risk? And whenever we do something to reduce the risk, that should also change the premium. And I think very often we see this disconnect between the IT industry and the insurance industry, where the insurance industry says we don't really understand IT and we don't understand IT risk. And then the IT industry says, well, we don't really understand insurance and we don't know what you're talking about. So I think that disconnect is also something we need to look at. and maybe have more IT people who are in the insurance industry, and maybe more underwriters who are working with the IT industry, so that we understand each other. I think very often what we find is very few insurers I know have really any understanding of what we really do.
So in other words, I think the need of the hour, I would say, is also to create that awareness amongst the IT and the non-IT people, and also help the insurance companies also understand the needs rather than just going through.
Right, and you know what really happens.
Yes.
So what does this thing do, and what, because very often it just, you look at, okay, oh, there's a system, an e-commerce system, okay, what's your total turnover, and you know, something like that. But are you looking at exactly how the system works, and what are the different components, and what are the risks involved in each component? And that's quite difficult, right? And okay, let me also mention another thing. Now there are small companies. Now for a small company, they will try to get a quote, and it's not like a motor or something, right? You just look at the value of the car and say, okay, this is a quote. But for IT, you can't just look at the value and give a quote. I mean, you might have to do a lot of things. And then if you take the point of view of the insurance company, if you have a small customer, and just to do the due diligence to figure out exactly what the risks are would actually probably cost more than the transaction is worth. So then that problem arises, okay, how do I figure out what really is the risk here? This is a small company, and I really can't put enough effort into figuring out what they're up to. So that's another issue. I mean, it's okay if you're a very large company and you're putting a very large policy, but what if you're a small company and you want a small policy? How do you figure anything out?
Thank you, Professor Diaz. Joy,
can I quickly add to that again?
Please.
Professor, one area that has been addressed by insurance companies such as HNB Assurance, to meet the point that you have just raised, is that they have actually tied up with IT security companies.
Right.
Okay, and as a part of their service, HNB actually does this. As a part of their service, those security companies will sit with you and then help you to analyze your systems and processes in terms of the risk. They do it free of charge. Of course, you have to give them permission to have access to information.
Right. So yes, but my view, since we also run a security company, is getting a security company to do something free of charge, and I think Sujit will also agree, doesn't probably means you're not really getting a very thorough assessment.
Absolutely.
I guess it would at least help to, you know, set a framework that even, you know, even if it is free of charge, you at least get a framework.
Right. I'm sure, you know, free of charge, you can do a very basic stuff, but IT security assessments are quite expensive.
True. Absolutely. And Professor Diaz, I think that's a significant observation in the sense, is it a dipstick analysis which you just go through tick, 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 or are you going to really get into the processes and assess? That's going to require not only time and effort, but also you need the right skills to do that. Right.
But having said that, I do believe then maybe a solution might be for insurance companies and security companies to form some kind of partnership. To say that, okay, if you do the security analysis and the security company gives us this type of report, I mean, basically a no claim bonus type of thing, right? Or a, you know, whatever the normal thing, you know.
That is what is happening, Professor.
Right. But what I'm saying is, you do a proper security analysis, and with that report, you can get quite a bit of a discount on your premiums, something like that.
Absolutely. Great. So Joey, I'm coming to you. Right? Any product in the market, anything, right? It's all dependent on what you call the dynamics of economics. That law of economics cannot change. If there is a higher demand, can the prices go down or can go up, right? Depending on what the product is, right? If it's less required, then the price can go up or down. Now, if you look at the cyber security market per se in Sri Lanka, what is driving it? Is there a demand driving it, or there is no demand driving it?
In terms of cyber insurance, demand is driving it. So there's a huge increase in demand for cyber insurance amongst corporate Sri Lanka these days. So demand is certainly driving it. The problem is that the insurance companies are struggling to come up with viable solutions. Now, right now, we are handling a number of these requests. Maybe I should talk to Deepali later on. We are handling a number of these requests, which the local market is unable to come up with viable solutions. And the IT teams, obviously, in these corporates are quite frustrated because they keep answering reams of questions. And then the quotations in terms of the, the spread of cover, the sublimits and so on are simply not viable. But there is a huge increase in demand, probably stemming from the fact that there's widespread use of IT, plus this work from home environment has increased risk as well. Plus, I think, as I mentioned from the statistics that I spoke of earlier on, there has been an increase of incidents as well.
Absolutely. So, Joey, I mean, that means in 4 months, the status has changed, because the last time we had this conversation was first week of December, right? Yeah. And this is some insights for people who are actually listening in. Like at that point in time, we probably did not have so much of visibility, but now we are seeing a demand for insurance, right? So again, I'm going to ask you, all three of you, a question. Let's take a ransomware attack as an example. It's easy to say, okay, so-and-so, this company, this machine got compromised. But the moment we use the word cyber, we are talking about interconnectedness. And I'm referring to this famous cyber incident which caused a disruption for Merck, the pharmaceutical company, right? And 40,000 of their machines were ransomed. Then, of course, we had Merceline and various other people also at the same time going through the same ransomware handler encrypted their machines as well. So one of the challenges which the insurance companies had was to determine that the particular incident actually happened in their premises, in their devices. Or were they in a position to say, okay, it happened somewhere else, but because of the interconnectedness, that this transformed into a risk for Merck, right? So if I were to ask Professor Diaz this question, is interconnectedness, now definitely I think in the last 2 years, the organizations have transformed significantly. And I think work from home is one contributing factor, but a lot of processes have been automated. And a lot of organizations have started looking at connecting their systems so that they can seamlessly transact. And one of the examples is the supply chain industry. Is this going to be a challenge for us? Because we are also looking at being a supply chain hub in this part of the world, right? And with all the port facilities and all the warehouses which are coming out around. What do you see as a challenge, Professor Diaz?
Yes. So let me say that the more connectedness we have, the more, in general, our efficiency will go up, right? If everything is interconnected, then our customers as well as ourselves, we can get more work done. But also, everything time you connect something to something else, risks increase. And especially if you connect to things which are outside your control. So you connect to suppliers, you connect to customers, you connect to various third-party service providers. Now, unless you are quite aware of exactly what their systems are and what is threats they may be subject to, or maybe they already have. For example, if you connect to somebody, how do you know there isn't already a hacker, a guy sitting in their system waiting to connect to you as soon as you connect to them? So we don't know that. So I think we have to identify that the risks go up. But my view is, if you say that we are not going to do that, then we will not be able to progress. I can still remember many years ago, before this e-commerce and internet came up, many companies said we are never ever going to connect our mainframes to this internet. Oh, it's a bad thing, right? I think a lot of banks said that. Oh, we are a bank, we are not going to connect to the internet, but they were forced to because the customers wanted it. And all of this interconnectedness is going to be put on us whether we like it or not. And therefore we need to look at it. But yes, it causes risk. So I think the solution is to be very careful. Whenever we connect to someone else, we need to look at every single bit passing in or out and make sure it's sanitized, and then it is it is what we expect to happen. So if you connect, and this is zero trust thing as well, right? So I don't want to talk about zero trust right now, but basically what zero trust says is, if I get some information from someone, I don't trust that person implicitly. I verify everything myself, right? And that needs to be happen whenever you connect to partners.
Professor Diaz, I'm very glad that you mentioned about zero trust, right? And in my personal opinion, and that's one way of reducing your risk. When you reduce your risk, that means your premiums also can go down, which means you can be more agile. You can be able to, do a lot more things if you adopt the right framework, right? So, Joey, I'm just going to ask a related question on the same lines, right? Now, interconnectedness. How do you guys determine that this risk originated in this particular location and that you will not reject a claim?
No, I don't think the insurance policy is so concerned once an incident occurs and they're addressing the incident as to where precisely the thing has occurred. But just from the point of view of assessing future issues, they might want to know that. But as far as the loss is concerned, I don't think that's really material, Sujit. They will try and ascertain what the ingress is, how much it would cost to rectify. If it's ransomware, how do they deal with that? Is a payoff necessary? That type of stuff. Subsequently, though, they will then try and find out. They'll do a root cause analysis, and then find out whether an improvement can be done to the systems and processes to prevent such an occurrence reoccurring. So that's how it would operate. The actual point of origin is not of relevance, apart from trying to ascertain as to whether the policy covers the breach.
Okay, so I'm going to touch on something on the same lines. This is for Deepali. I'm sure you know what happened at the Colonial Pipeline incident, right? And the US government stepped in and said, do not pay ransom. Right, so here government is saying do not pay. And what will be the stand of an insurance company?
If I've understood your question correctly, you're saying if the government says do not pay the ransom.
Yes, government says do not pay, but the company has a ransomware insurance cover.
Yeah.
What would be the state of the client?
Okay, so the cyber policy, when it says that it covers ransomware, the amount which, the ransom amount is just one of the components of cover that is available. The insurance policy is meant to respond to whatever is the cost that you incur while trying to address a breach that has already happened. Now, if you were to pay the ransom, then that cost can get picked up. But if you were to, address the issue without having paid the ransom, you are able to do away with the breach that has happened, do away as in resolve the breach that has happened, and you are able to come out of that situation. The insurance company is going to be, is going to pay you the cost that you incurred in doing so. Mm-hmm. Unless there is any hardcore evidence to prove that had you paid the ransom, then you could have saved an X value of your expenses. Now that is something which is very difficult to determine, because there have been enough instances where even after having paid the ransom, the systems are still hung up, the systems are still held by the hacker, and nothing comes out. So we still need to do it, put in all of our efforts to get our systems back in our control. So the insurance company, and I don't really know what happened in that particular case and what the insurance company stand has been, but I would say that the insurance company would not be deterred, and they'll be very happy that some amount of the cost is saved. At least I don't have to put out the bill for the ransom. But yes, they will stand by and support you on whatever you need to do on the technology front, on the forensic front, to mitigate the extent of the loss that has happened.
Absolutely. So Joey, continuing on the same lines, right? We've also seen the statistics, and Professor Diaz, you would also agree that there are a lot of research papers or research material, or there are reports which indicate that on an average, a hacker has dwelled in a network. If you look at the Asian region, they've been in the network for about 400 days. Only less than 3% of the companies were able to detect a breach within a few minutes. 65% of the companies did not even know, even after months, that they were breached. Right? So the question is, the hacker is in the network, he is able to see what is going on. Would he take that as an opportunity to stay in the network and understand whether you're going to buy an insurance policy or whether you have an insurance policy? And if you do have an insurance policy, can even exert pressure on you, not even 10% discount, you pay the full amount?
You're talking from the point of view of the hacker, is it?
I'm talking from a point of view of a hacker, and I also want to get a view in terms of, okay, how does this tie into our conversation? Okay, what is the stand the insurers and insurance company would take? So Professor Diaz, your thoughts?
So I am just talking aloud, so I don't really have any real insight onto this.
Yes.
Yes. So if you are talking about a very advanced hacker, he would probably look into that, because obviously he'd need to assess what exactly he's going to do. And this would be only for people who are doing some kind of extortion, ransomware, some story like that. Because most people would be looking to exfiltrate some data, or maybe cause some financial loss or something like that. But if, let's say, he decides that since you are insured, you can afford to pay more, so therefore I will ask for more, that would be certainly true. But I think that would also be true of many other kinds of insurance, right? For example, if I am a three-wheeler, let's say, right, and I go and hit a Maruti, right, I would probably, or not I hit a Maruti, maybe I'm hit by a Maruti, right, I might accept 10,000 rupees as compensation, whereas if I'm hit by a Mercedes-Benz, I would ask for more, simply because, I mean, not that my damages are more, simply because I think that guy can pay more. So I think it's a very similar thing to this, right? If you feel the guy has a bigger capacity to pay, you will ask for more money. And insurance would be only part of the deal.
Sure. So Joey, I'm just coming back to you, right? I spoke about connectedness, right? And the insurance business is all about quantifying the risk. Now, if you take a physical building, we can say, okay, this building costs so much. If there's a fire, this would be my loss. Now, in a connected environment, right, we are talking about multiple organizations, multiple devices, and these multiple organizations may also have an insurance policy. Does that actually cause a concern for you in terms of really quantifying the risk, or is it actually making you flee from the industry and saying, okay, guys, we will not do this cover for you, we are bleeding, right?
Yeah, it does cause a lot of concern to the reinsurance. That's one of the issues that the Sri Lankan insurance industry has in responding to cyber insurance solutions, especially for diversified conglomerates here in Sri Lanka. is this fact that you have this variety of different software solutions across different SBUs. Many of them have interconnectivity. Plus, you also have this issue to do with the fact that you have remote connections and so on. Now, obviously, the risk factor increases tremendously when you have a situation like that. And for the reinsurers, this is a problem. This is actually the problem that the Sri Lankan market has. And in responding to the queries from the reinsurers, we are not making available full draft of information to enable them to assess this aspect of the risk, Sujit. So that's a good question. And it is actually the core problem that the insurance industry has at the moment. Assessing the quantum of the risk is a different thing altogether, because in arriving at a value, so let's say $2 million or $5 million or $1 million or even $100,000, you have to try and ascertain how much it would cost you, how much it would cost your business in addressing an ingress into your systems. That is the value that you need to put down. Plus, you also have this third-party liability that Deepali has spoken about. If those eventualities do occur, how much would you be exposed to? Could somebody sue you? If so, how much? So those are the values that you need to assess when you put down the figure for cyber insurance.
Deepali, do you want to comment on whatever?
Yeah, I would like to add, in fact, to what Mr. Joy has been saying. Absolutely right. I mean, to give you an idea in terms of what currently is the status or the situation with the reinsurance market and why it's becoming a challenge is precisely this, you know, the interconnectedness, I would say, of the globe today. From a cyber insurance perspective, it's reached a stage where it is difficult to segregate and say that this particular kind of loss will happen or has happened only to one particular insured or one particular industry and so on. You know, the incident that you were referring to about Maersk is something which happened, and I think 65 countries got affected all at the same time. Now, when things like that happen, cyber reinsurers are faced with, you know, a huge cause of concern. What they term it in their jargon as accumulation, and they're just accumulating losses from every corner of the globe. The second aspect, you know, one is, of course, I have issued, you know, 100 policies and 80 policies are lodging a claim from one particular ransomware attack. That is, you know, incident one. Incident two is I am also getting hit by a claim from policies where it's called the silent cyber cover. I mean, where there is no exclusion for a cyber loss, but there is a property damage, say in a factory, which has happened. And the reason for that has been a cyber attack in that company. So whether that will get picked up, that will not get picked up, how can I pick it up? What does my policy say? Is there a specific exclusion? Is there no exclusion? So those are the kind of things which I think the reinsurance industry today are really grappling with. And they have, in turn, started bringing out, you know, a lot more clarity from their perspective of saying that, okay, I will not offer silent cyber. I will only talk about affirmative cyber cover on the policies. If it is silent, then I'm not going to look at it, whether the property will cover. So we have seen a lot of property insurance policies across the globe now specifically having an exclusion for any cyber related risk, as against a silent policy being issued where I'm not referring to a cyber risk at all. So accumulation is currently a huge concern for the reinsurance companies. And that is also the reason why they have stepped back now and said, hold on, we were, you know, going aggressive and offering policies to everybody, but right now I need to hold back and check where my accumulation is coming from. There are, you know, organizations now who have come up, who you would have heard of a CAT modeling, which is done for flood and earthquake assessment. You have organizations, cybersecurity firms who do similar modeling for insurance and reinsurance companies to assess what is their exposure on cyber after having issued policies like this. So these are reasons why reinsurance companies are taking a step back. And if they are to offer cover, then they're putting in a lot of conditions. They're saying it's going to cost you a lot more. And I need to have a lot more information before I'm convinced that I can give you a policy. And I think what they're looking at is really insisting on the fact that I'm looking at a contingency. I don't think, they will be comfortable with offering a cover to corporates where they're saying that, we are in a position where we don't know when the attack is going to happen, which also brings me back to a point, Sujit, which I wanted to make earlier when we were talking about the information flow. A huge concern that reinsurers have is the hesitance in sharing information with the reinsurer when they're looking at purchasing a product. So one is, of course, filling up the 20-page proposal form, which Mr. Joey was referring to, but also at the same time being okay to share that information with your reinsurer and be open with them. I think that's a huge hurdle, which we are facing possibly in Sri Lanka, where if corporates are open to sharing, sign your NDAs with your brokers and sign your NDAs with the insurance and the reinsurance companies to safeguard yourself. But at the same time, through your trusted channels, please do share information, which will only help in structuring better covers for you.
Yeah. Deepali, thank you. Thank you for that insight. We are about 6 minutes to wrap up the session, right? But I want to talk about two keywords, right? So I want to, ask Joey and you to tell me about it in very brief, right? And I have one more question after this to ask all of you, right? Hostile and warlike situation. Right? If I don't talk about it, this conversation is not complete, because the email campaign talked about what's happening in Europe right now. So
Right.
how does that impact us as consumers of who's having a cyber insurance policy? Who wants to go first?
I'll have a quick stab at that one, but I'm sure Deepali will have more knowledge about it. So the cyber insurance policies all have exclusions for things like war and so on. And what is happening in places like Ukraine and also Russia could be deemed to be warlike situations, and which will not be covered in your insurance policies. So just to give you an example, when the day Russia invaded the Ukraine, the American satellite communication provider YSAT was hacked. Conversely, Ukraine has a raft of cyber hackers called Anonymous, who are hacking into Russian systems. Now, these are exclusions in the policies of insurance, and losses caused by these scenarios are, strictly speaking, excluded. However, in certain circumstances, and I'm sure Deepali can shed some light on this, it is possible to customize, to get back to the term that you use, customize your insurance policy to cover some aspects of this. So for instance, it's possible to cover business interruption as a result of cyber warfare and so on. Deepali, would you like to add to that?
You're absolutely right. War is, and I think will possibly continue to be, an exclusion under the policy. So if any of the reinsurers are currently have any Russian or Ukraine corporate as their insured, and there are cyber attacks which are happening, and it is linked to a cyber warfare that has kind of triggered between the two countries, then the policy is going to be silent on it. In terms of the carve-back that Mr. Joey was mentioning, and whether the carve-back is possible, anything is possible if it comes at the right price. So you would need to build a very strong case in terms of how bad is the situation, or how is it that your country is not at war. So a corporate sitting in Sri Lanka is being affected by a war which is happening between Ukraine and Russia, and how is that really impacting you? So whether that incident really gets triggered to the warlike situation, or whether it is an isolated incident here, it would need to be explored and debated, and with the insurance company to arrive at what could be the customization that is possible. But an instant answer would be that anything to do with war and warlike situation is an exclusion.
Deepali, but just for as a quick question, who decides on that? Because now even the two incidents which I mentioned, which is the attack on the US satellite system, and then this attack by anonymous, who decides whether it is war?
So if it is a cyber warfare, then the government would need to make a statement which would term it as a cyber warfare. So it's like your standalone terrorism cover. The government has to state that there is a terrorist attack which has happened, and that's how it will get identified. So same as would be the case in this instance also.
Okay, thanks.
Right. So that's interesting. I mean, I think if we go on for a couple of hours, we can go on talking about this subject, but all good things have to come to an end. And I think we are at that moment here. So I would like to hear your closing thoughts. So we'll start with Professor Diaz and then Joey and Deepali, in that order. Your closing thoughts.
Thank you, Christy. So first of all, I'd like to thank the panelists. I think this was an excellent discussion. I learned a lot because I'm obviously not an expert in cyber insurance. I think overall, what we can see is that cyber is getting more and more. Cyber means people doing things online is increasing, and the risk is increasing, and we need to manage the risk. So insurance, I think, is only one facet of risk management. As we said, trying to mitigate the risk, trying to protect against the risk. That's all part of the deal, and I think everybody should look at this in a holistic way, right? I think trying to say that, okay, there's a risk, so just let's get some insurance cover is not really going to work, because even if you do get hit, you'll probably find it's one of the exclusions. So we need to figure out what to do. And so I think my takeaway is awareness. So this is a very good session we had here, and we had around 100 people. And so we did get some awareness, but that's not really enough. I think we do need to create much more awareness of the issues and how they can be mitigated.
Joey?
So for my closing thoughts, insurance and cyber insurance is a route that corporates can take in order to mitigate their financial losses from the excesses of an ingress into their system. However, it may not be I'm talking about here in Sri Lanka, it may not be the most economical of the solutions that are available. So from my point of view, my suggestion to corporates and also to the IT personnel is to go through the process of getting a quotation. Use those forms, as I mentioned right at the start of the discussion, as a benchmark of what the overseas reinsurers are looking for in terms of your security, your processes, and so on, and then assessing whether you measure up to that. That process by itself, even if you don't go through in getting a quotation, is, in my opinion, extremely useful. But go that step further and push your insurance service provider in getting you terms for an insurance product in terms of transferring your risk, then ascertain as to whether that is something that you wish to have.
Thank you. Deepali?
Well, honestly, it's more to echo the thoughts of what Professor Diaz and Mr. Joey have been saying. Yes, my suggestion to my friends in Sri Lanka would be, don't get scared of the current hard market in the cyber insurance space. Yes, it is a difficult market, and it will take time for it to come to a level where it is easy to purchase the product. But having said that, the risk is so dynamic, and it is evolving every day. And so is the insurance industry in terms of trying to respond to it. So go through the process, engage with your, insurer and broker partners, share the information with them and see to what level you can have a product in place, purchase a product and keep it in place, because when an incident hits, you don't want to be regretting a small decision saying, if only I had agreed to pay a few $1,000s, then I would have saved many thousands and millions of dollars today. So let that regret not be there. It's difficult to decide what should be my quantum of cover. It is difficult to decide in terms of what should be the best customization possible, but make a start. Because there is no scientific method of arriving at a quantum of cover. To start with $1 million, start with $2 million. I'm saying that, but I also know reinsurers are not very eager to offer smaller limits. But having said that, if we are able to showcase that we are much better prepared from an IT security standpoint, and we are doing what needs to be done to get at an optimum level, then you will have reinsurers. It might take a longer period. You can't get quotes overnight. It would take a couple of weeks, maybe a month to do the entire process, but you do have reinsurers who are willing to engage with you and offer you the product. So, don't get scared away with the current situation in the market. Go through the process and be a part of it. It's only going to yield good results.
Absolutely. Thank you, Deepali, for those thoughts. And there are a lot of takeaways, good ones, right? So as Professor Diaz mentioned, a lot of awareness. And I think that's the first step that we have done. And as Deepali mentioned, hygiene, good habits, right? So like when we were going through the pandemic, we said, clean hands, do not touch the face, social distancing. I apply the same thing for the technology as well. Apply the same logic to the tech as well. Are we able to identify, do those tests, like maybe it is a rapid antigen test or it's a PCR test, whatever, right? So are we doing the right tests in terms of audits and able to identify the effectiveness of controls? And more importantly, we also need to go through that process. Like, Joey has been repeatedly emphasizing on that. It's a long process, but it's worth every single penny, right? So go through the process. It will also help you to identify the gaps you have. You can prioritize. You can use that as a checklist to prioritize your next IT investment. Or you may even be able to rearrange or repurpose your investments. And then, of course, you need to have a framework to monitor what is actually happening in your network. Are you able to detect any anomalies? How quickly can you detect? And do you have a framework to respond to those incidents? Are you clear as to who would do what and how they would actually go about attending to those incidents? So when you do all these things, right, identifying your assets, applying the right preventive controls, and then generating your alerts using your detective controls, and then having a response and remediation plan would make your framework much more simpler, easier to adopt. And also I encourage, like as Professor Diaz mentioned, he briefly mentioned about the zero trust. And I think it's a good framework to look at. Do not trust, no implicit trust, always verify. And I would also like to highlight, look at from your identity perspective. Who is the user accessing your assets? Do they have the right permissions? Do you authenticate them enough? And do you have a mechanism to look at the audit trails, look at exceptions? Are you able to detect anything which is abnormal and take immediate actions, right? So it's important to set up a monitoring system. So when you do all these things, then the cost you're looking at in terms of a premium, which probably is staggering right now, may actually come down significantly because you have a fully fit organization. You're talking about a fit set of people a good set of processes, and technology meeting the best practices, or up-to-date technology. So with that thought, I would like to first thank FITIS, the board members of FITIS, for putting this wonderful program together and inviting me to be the moderator. And I also want to thank Professor Diaz, Joey, and Deepali for being with me here, answering all the questions without saying no. And everything you said had a deeper meaning. And I'm sure everyone in this call, even though we are well over time and we still see a lot of people on the call. So that's a good indication that we need to come back and talk about this more in depth, right? So with that thought, I would like to thank all of you participants for making time and staying with us. And I hope this will be a start of a new beginning in terms of securing your infrastructure. Thank you so much, and you have a great evening, and it was wonderful being with you. Have a great
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been an honor. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.